Okay, we'll start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our third webinar in our Earthworm webinar series. My name is Julien Troussier. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. We had a great response to our last webinar. Unfortunately, not all could join. We had limited capacity, so this time there were about 300 people signing up, and hopefully we made changes to make sure everyone could join. So those webinars are made in the spirit of sharing what we and others have learned on some key sustainability challenges. And this time, our topic is regenerative agriculture, as you can see on the screen, and how businesses can satisfy growing consumer demand and mitigate climate change. So the next slide. A few words about Earthworm for the one who don't know us. We're a 20-year-old organization. We've been working around the world on a range of social and environmental issues in commodity supply chains. We used to be known as TFT, the Forest Trust, since our focus initially was mostly on forest, but more and more soil is a growing part of our work. We have about 220 staff, mostly in the field, working on solutions to regenerate landscapes. So next slide, please, about our speakers for today. So the first speaker will be Pascal Boivin. Pascal is a professor of soil science at EPA in Geneva. It's part of the University of Applied Science of Western Switzerland. He'll give us some background on what we mean by healthy soils, and also what are the challenges for the food industry. After Pascal will be Bastien Sachet from Earthworm Foundation. He's the CEO of Earthworm. He'll explain how the whole food system needs to change, not just farmers, and also give the example of a living soil project in France. After Bastien, there'll be Yann Ouireau from Nestle. He's part of a global responsible sourcing team. And Yann will explain how Nestle supports regenerative agriculture by working with its supply chain partners. After that, Karima Essabak will speak. She is the CR director at McCain. She will talk about the practical experience of a brand working with farmers towards transformation. And our last speaker will be Melchior de Muralt. He's a managing director at PPT. He specializes in sustainable and impact finance. And Melchior will explain how innovative finance can support the transition towards regenerative agriculture. And lastly, we'll have a Q&A. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. But before that, I'll say a few words about why this webinar now. One reason is that many companies are looking for practical and impactful solutions to climate. And consumers are increasingly asking about where their product comes from. And the COVID crisis definitely has led to more people questioning the resilience of the food system. And so regenerative agriculture is one of those rare solutions that has the potential to be positive at all levels, in terms of climate, in terms of supply chain resilience, in terms of farmers' resilience as well. But it's a transformation that involves a lot of different actors in the supply chain. And today there are only few real-life examples of this kind of systemic change happening at scale. So last slide for me is about the questions. So please ask your questions during the whole webinar. There'll be a 15-minute Q&A at the end where we answer hopefully most of those questions. But do share those questions through the Q&A box. There's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any other comments, maybe about what is being said or technical comments, there's the chat button. So use that only for this type of request. And please do add the name of a person. If you have a specific person in mind, add the name of that person to your question. And we have been running a poll at the beginning. You might still see it on your screen. There'll be also another poll at the end. We'll ask you a question related to this webinar. So we'll get into it after this introduction. Pascal Boivin is our first speaker. He's going to give us the scientific background on what are healthy soils and what that means for the food industry.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next slide, maybe. Yes, I will start with healthy soils. This refers to soil quality in general, and soil quality is defined as the ability of the soil to fulfill its functions. The Millennium Assessments at the beginning of this century has shown that most ecosystem services were indeed determined by soil functions, which are considered as the cornerstone of the ecosystem services. And a key for healthy soil is its humus content, what we call in soil science soil organic carbon content, and you used to call it humus. It is the key for healthy soil properties, and therefore for the cornerstone of ecosystem services. A high soil organic carbon content and a good soil structure, they go together, but this provides energy and habitat for soil biota. This is why also we are talking of living soil, because this is the result of a high quality soil and the result of, in particular, of agricultural practices allowing for high organic carbon content. Next slide, please. And this is because soil organic carbon content determine most of the soil properties. Indeed, all the soil functions that were investigated were shown to be related and proportionally related to the soil organic carbon content. Here is an unclosed list, but you have such as physical properties like porosity, water retention, aeration, infiltration, stability, and mechanical properties of the soil, such as the capacity to withstand the weight of the machines, nutrient availability, biological activity and biodiversity, water depuration, etc. All these functions or all these properties are proportional to the soil organic carbon content. Next slide, please. Thank you. And what we also know is that the intensified agriculture that was promoted second half of the 20th century led to a huge carbon loss in the soil. It was not the target soil organic carbon. And intensification means shortened rotations with even to one culture only, that is monoculture, residue exploitation, such as straw exploitation, and also the mechanical steering of the soil with deep plowing, with powerful trucks, with weight and speed of these machines. All these things have promoted a huge carbon loss. It is estimated that the cultivated soils have lost 50 to 70% of their soil organic carbon content, which means 50 to 70% of their functions. Next slide, please. This is also considered as an opportunity. Maybe you know that COP21 has calculated that the global emissions every year of fossil carbon are equal to 4 per mil of the organic carbon, which is in the soil as humus. So it was also considered as a potential negative emission technologies by capturing the atmospheric CO2 with plants and transforming it into humus, which means increasing by 4 per mil the humus content of the soil would simply balance the fossil emission. Of course, this is just a number to stimulate our imagination, but this shows the potential of increasing the soil organic carbon content of the soil that we need for whatever the climate issue because of the soil quality. The negative emission technologies were proposed at COP21. There was 7, I think, negative emission technologies, and they were reviewed by different scientific assemblies, in particular European Academy Science Advisory Council, and they've shown that it was probably the only negative emission technologies to have a significant potential for the ecological transition to mitigate climate change. Maybe next slide, please. So the 4 per mil initiative also pointed out some methods to allow for carbon storage in soil. Interestingly, these methods are not the ones that were promoted during the past decades in most industrialized agriculture, of course. This was mostly developed on their own by farmers, and it's called conservation agriculture, this package of methods. It steps on 3 pillars. You have the low mechanical intensity with mostly no tillage, no soil inversion. The soil must be always covered by plants, would it be the main crop or intercrops like cover crops. and the vegetal intensity must be very high, which means diversify crops, multi-species in main crops and in cover crops, and a big biomass. Next slide. The questions of the 4 per mil and in general the potential of conservation agriculture to mitigate climate change is very disputed by many papers, many studies. But if you go to the field, you can see that it works. These are numbers from the southern Switzerland, 3,000 fields that are monitored. And you see here it goes in abscissa from end of 20th centuries to now. And each dot is a field. And the numbers are the rate of change, the yearly rate of change in the soil organic carbon content. So they go from minus 40 to plus 40 per mil, which means it can be largely emitting carbons or sequestrating carbon. It can be 10 times more than 4 per mil. And interestingly, can you come back to interestingly, on average, it was negative before 2005. It was, in 2000, it was minus 4 per mil. But now it has changed with different measures belonging to the conservation agriculture tools. And in average now in Switzerland, southern Switzerland at least, we are at plus 9 per mil. That means already more than the 4 per mil. Next slide, please. Of course, there are many challenges for farmers to perform conservation agriculture. Next slide. And I can just summarize up very shortly, but that's a full change of paradigm. The full system must be transformed. It's just a matter of not plowing you have to redesign all the cropping system, and there is therefore need for capacity building. And moreover, it's a change of approach because you move from blind application of rules that you were taught to self-diagnosis and technique application. The transition lasts about 5 years and it can be difficult. Most of the failures are during the first 5 years. It's based on general rules, but you have to decline them in local conditions. So that's really something which is done by the farmer based on general rules and together with advisors. Next slide, maybe. Also, we must say that there is also a big potential to develop, and it is the lumping, because the gross margins per hectare are not decreased with conservation agriculture. The charges, and in particular manpower, are decreased. Also, gas, fuel consumption. There is an improved income, free time, and pleasure at work. All farmers underline this. They get more pleasure at work. And now we see that likewise farmers even have not decreased their yields, even they have increased them. Next slide. That's also a big challenge for the food industry. We used to be questioned by decision makers with a scientist or advisors saying, what should we do? But we can give advices, we can give references. But in fact, what we see is that the industry is shaping a lot farmers' practices. Industry and the global food chain is shaping farmers' practices, and that's probably much more than policies. As an example, the key is diversification of the cropping systems, which means you need smaller transformation units, very diversified, capable of treating very diversified crops at local scales. Also, you need to reshape the landscape to reshape this cropping system, and you need incentives as for. So there's a lot to do in that way. Next slide. And I would emphasize that for the food industry also, there's a need for capacity building. This is something we see now. Soils and agriculture in general are not well known. And these are very sophisticated matters, very complex matters. Each time you go to a farm and can discuss with a farmer practicing conservation agriculture, you can see that this is very sophisticated indeed. And if you don't know that, you will go to simple but wrong thinking. And so I think we have to share a common knowledge along the food chain if we want to go in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Thank you for summarizing something so complex in a few minutes for us. Now, Bastien Sachet of Earthworm will explain to us how the food system as a whole needs to change and give us the example of a living soil project in France.
Thank you, Julien, and thank you, Pascal. So we can start with the first slide. I like to say it starts with the soil, because often we talk about agriculture and we forget about the soil. Next slide. in agronomic school, I remember when I studied, we talked a lot about plants. We talked about seeds. We talked about how you treat plants, etc. And a lot of seed varietal improvements were the focus. But soils was not really the focus. It's kind of something basic we need to deal with anyway. But it's changing, and when you see measurements like the one Pascal has just shown in terms of the capacity to store carbon, it's clearly important. The other thing is that soil is not the consumer's focus. It's very far from the consumer, but it's the basis of everything. Because if you've got a healthy soil, you've got a healthy plant. And if you've got a healthy plant, you've got less need for pesticides, you've got less needs for many things, and you end up with a healthier farmer and a healthier consumer. Next. The challenge when you want to bring back soil at the center of the food system is that soil health is not something that is usually measured in a systematic way. Yeah, fertilizer salespeople measure it to be able to make some recommendation and sell fertilizers, but it's not really something that is at the center of how people manage their system. It's not well measured. And the justification about how you recenter your management system at farm level around soil is also not clear. Next. So we wanted to put the focus on the soil. Because we also believe it's not about creating a new type of agriculture that is different from agriculture. We've got organic, we've got conservation, we've got all these kinds of agriculture. But the challenge is we don't want to create schools and silos of the different types of agriculture that are defined by practices. Instead, we want to focus on soil health as something that is good for everyone. And as we realized, and as Pascal said, is that this soil health and regenerative agriculture is not the problem of farmers only. It's not just a technical problem. It's also conditioned by the whole supply chain. So we've launched this initiative about 3 years ago, next slide, to involve and work collaboratively around soil health as a common that we all care for. Across the supply chain, from the consumer, the brands, the retailers, the manufacturers and industries up to the farmer, but also at landscape level, because soil is what makes a landscape, a territory, if you want. And this is where all the institution, government, scientists, people, citizens can collaborate and work together. So the result, next slide, is that we've got a coalition of people that is growing, made of brand businesses, really involving the private sector, because we believe they have a lot of influence on soils. A lot of technical partners, as you can see, from scientists, experts, all sorts of organizations who are interested and have recognized the importance of managing soil health. And of course, a lot of institutions and in particular scientists, but also farmer organizations, because we want to work with them to be able to measure and progress in soil health. Next slide. Why do we focus in the landscape and how do we focus in the landscape? Every business is connected to the land in a different fashion. The last 10 years have been about managing risk and compliance, imposing norms on farmers on every specific crop. Don't do this, don't apply that. And we see so many labels trying to impose to the farmers how they should do their wheat and how they should do their potatoes, etc. That's okay, but it doesn't drive change. A farmer manages a farm and managing soils, not just for one crop, for a whole rotation. So we bring in the leverage of the different brands across the rotations in the landscapes and try to make everyone work in synergy and align about what is being asked to the farmer so that the collaboration is constructive and a lot of mutualization of the work can be done. Next. On this initiative, we focus on three things. The first one is to support farmers in their transition. And when we say we focus, it doesn't mean we do it ourselves. We work with a lot of partners who, on the ground, have developed expertise in how to support farmers, train, bring knowledge, and get them to work together. A lot of peer-to-peer learning happens. Then we see as critical the way the measurement of soil health. If we can't align on how we measure the health of the soil, it's very difficult to get the same view on the problem, or it's also very difficult to pilot the system. So the measurement is key. And three, we incentivize because we believe change of behavior, which is what we're talking about, is only motivated when you have an incentive to do so. Is it more time? Is it more money? Is it something that rewards you and drives you in a certain direction? Next. So talking about the first objective in supporting farmers, we are really working with a few key partners who bring different skills, different tools, but in a word, they pilot alongside with the farmer a transformation of practices. And that is done, very close and in partnership with the farmers. Actually, often the farmers and have pioneered some things and they can share with others. And all this knowledge, which is not something that is academically taught, can be shared and can be emulated too. Next slide, sorry. This is the objective 2. It's about measuring soils in a simple way. And we like the idea of having something from A, B, C, D, E that allows you simply to see where you are in the journey. So you're not good or bad. You're just at a level of soil health on this specific field. And that allows you to figure out what you need to do and how do you direct your actions, what you could try. And more importantly, it doesn't focus on activities, but mostly on results. Where am I and what do I need to do to change? Next. Not the least, we can measure a number of parameters, but carbon storage is one very important parameters. We're working with different institutions and models to be able to do that, because we believe that it is significantly important to the rest of society, to farmers as well, and there is potential incentives that could come to drive and remunerate efforts when they are done. Next. In summary, what are we trying to do? Gather companies, gather institutions to define a way for soil health in a scientifically valid but practically implementable way. And we do this hand in hand with farmers. Out of this work, this definition of what a living soil is and what a healthy soil is, we can incorporate that into companies' sourcing guidelines, into the way companies source raw materials, by asking simply where I source from, how is soil health? And as we measure, we've got a lot of data that will emerge from the landscapes that will allow to do many things. Remunerate people who are doing an excellent job at storing carbons, at producing quality food, at reducing pesticides, etc. And incentivizing people or directing training knowledge to those who are, who are more challenged or who are not yet performing on soil health. But it's not a problem. It's a journey, and all different bodies, different institutions can help and support. We will see later the point of view of brands and the point of view of financiers and investors who also have a role to play. The key thing is for the farmer to realize that it's not another norm or another punition that comes on his shoulders. It's really an ecosystem of partners who are working hand in hand to figure out the way forward so that soil health can benefit and deliver all the benefits that it has still to deliver to the society. I think that's it. I've got one last slide just to give you an idea of what we aim. By 2030, we want to get 1 million hectares progressing towards regenerative agriculture. We want to enable at least 50 million euros of incentives or remuneration to support the transition towards regenerative agriculture, and on board 20 leading food companies that commit to healthy soil, measuring soil health in their supply chain, and driving all those positive leverage with the whole agricultural and food value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Bastien, for this great overview of some of the practical steps that can be taken in the value chain and what we're learning. Now we'll have Yann Gulereau speaking. He will speak about the actions that Nestle is taking to support regenerative practices.
Pleasure to be with you. I don't know if you heard me in the first part. This topic has really been ramping up at Nestle for the last 5 years, and it's really a pleasure to see how the uptake is taking today in such a wide environment. So, what we see here is that how Nestle will be supporting the transformation, and what kind of challenges are upcoming for us. So if you go to the next slide, and I'm mindful of my other colleagues speakers, I'll go shortly through the context. So why are we supporting this? Why is this type of agriculture, which has had different types of names over the last years, actually. The first one is climate change. So if you go to the next slide, in the fall of 2019, Nestle has really ramped up on answering to one of the greatest threat that humanity is facing, which is climate change, with a clear ambition, clear targets, and we're really gearing up for this. pressures arising from the upstream to the downstream value chain. We're having really a clear threat to our business model here. So we're going to ramp up with actions, threefold actions. One will be in re-engineering our packaging, looking at a diverse product portfolio, hunting for more climate-friendly raw materials. A second one is really in our existing, within and around our value chains, and specifically in the upstream, as we're discussing today. How do we capture, how do we mitigate the GHG emissions? And of course, we'll continue our journey on optimizing our own scope within our operations throughout the world and our more than 300 factories that we own. So if we go to the next slide, this is really something that is becoming a common knowledge. More and more food companies, large food companies, have this type of footprints. We're currently reviewing this data, refining our baselines and gearing up roadmaps in each of these value chain elements. But what stands out is, of course, the ingredients part, our raw materials impact, where we have less leverage on, and that's where we need to prioritize. So one of the reasons why regenerative agriculture is prioritized is here, and we have different task forces within the sourcing environment at Nestle, where a lot of internal, I would say, mind sharing is happening around the forest pillar, where we have our tropical raw materials discussed, be it coconut, palm oil, cocoa and coffee, etc. Dairy and the livestock pillar, which is one of our largest impact here. And the soils pillar, where our row crops are represented there, and be it what we will be discussing there today in the Living Soils project is the cereals and grains, the soy, and vegetables. So clearly, regenerative agriculture is looked at as one of the solutions in this journey to net zero. We've been looking at this type of agriculture in the past. If you go to the next slide, thanks. Yeah. For many other reasons, it's very clear that today we have other issues than climate in our food systems, but clearly this is being a trigger, an anchor to really accelerate. So there's a few items that guide us in how we're going to make that change. But to be very honest, no one really knows how this is going to happen. There's a lot to write, there's a lot to learn. Bastien and my colleague Pascal also mentioned this. We need to collaborate within and around supply chains and landscapes. Large companies might be very small in each and every one of their sourcing areas. We need to understand how to share that responsibility in the value chain. We need to, Nestle and beyond, we need to work with our marketing colleagues to really humbly create storytelling around this type of agriculture and contribute to increased demand. Again, there's a lot to learn and a lot to test on the ground. So I would finish this point by saying, there's a human part beyond the technicals, the agronomic part. Like we said, farmers will not do it on their own. There's really the humanity aspect of it that needs to be put back into this transition to go out from the niche premium brands, sourcing from this type of regenerative agriculture or whatever other name we give to it. We're looking also at reconnecting consumers to farmers, understanding where products come from, improve our traceability, and it can happen beyond farmers market. Even in large food companies, this needs to happen. So kind of moving away from the quantity over quality mindsets, which are full of negative impacts for food value chains. So if we go to the next slide, very quick one there. Of course, challenges. There are more than three. We do have very diverse and long value chains. The procurement models have been built up in a commodity mindset from the 1960s, which now are facing limits. So we have to reinvent this with our procurement colleagues, with externally also, and we need to start. We need to test. So basically, these are our challenges. We don't always have the leverage that we'd like to have in terms of fostering change. So that's one of the reasons why this will not happen overnight. I'm not alone in this journey. So if we go to the next slide, to be more specific to Sol Vivant and how happy we are to contribute and scale this up, specifically now with this climate ambition, which, like I said, is one of the reasons why we want to improve the agricultural outputs, positive outputs from this type of practices. Like we said, there's livelihoods issue, there's consumer trust issues, etc. So we need to understand more about how to measure, how to tailor these practices on our different sourcing regions. This one in France is very important. France being our top three markets. Most of the raw materials that go into our factories in France come from the country. There's a lot to learn there, and even to scale up, be it by this model or others that we'll have from these learnings into the US and into India, where we want to kickstart other pilot projects. So we have to accelerate there. All these learnings will really, like I said, help us to scale the models, and for this we need clear indicators, which was missing in the past in showing our progress in these different attributes. So with this, it's quite an intimidating journey ahead. To be very honest, we remain quite optimistic to at least doing our part. Again, it's one of the toolkit solutions. We are open arms for learning with others. It will happen at landscape levels and not supply chains by supply chains, and so we're very excited to continue with Earthworm on that journey. So thank you very much for listening, and over to you, Julien.
Thank you, Yann. Thank you for giving us this overview of how Nestle is tackling that complexity and moving forward to bring change in the value chain. Our next speaker is Karima Sabak. She will speak about the practical experience of McCain working with farmers in France.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. We can go directly to the other slide. So first, just to set really quickly, McCain is a company, a Canadian company. We're still a family company. And what is interesting about this is that the McCain family is actually a farming and former farmers for 3 generations already. Next slide. So we are a global business. We are operating in more than 160 countries, and we are employing now more than 22,000 people and representing 10 billion Canadian dollar of turnover. Next slide. I wanted to share our purpose, which is just released a few weeks ago, and I think which is important because it set the tone. We are aiming to be the leader of prepared potato and appetizer, but our higher purpose is to celebrate real connections through delicious planet-friendly food. So it was really important for us to put on our higher purpose, our engagement and commitment to the planet. Other slide. How do we concretely make that happen? We work at McCain on 5 years roadmap plans. And as you can see, this is the 2025 roadmap for us, which will guide us in this journey. But you have to know that here in McCain in Europe, we are already at the 3rd roadmap. It means that it's more than a decade. We are trying to improve our practices. We work on 4 different pillars. The first one is smart and sustainable agriculture. Of course, it's about mitigating our impact on the environment, but it's also contributing to reduce our CO2 emission. This CO2 emission is also our main goal for the 2nd pillar, which is improving our efficiency, the efficiency of our operation. Of course, we are working on our products and how to make it the more sustainable and healthy for our customers. And the last one is really important because it is also thriving communities, and we do include there our relationship with farmers. Next slide. So what about our sustainable and smart and sustainable farming? Here is our commitments for 2025. We aim at reducing by 25% the CO2 intensity emission linked to our farming operations, and to reduce by 15% the use of water in scarce region. What I want to share above this is that agriculture for a company such as McCain, who is producing and processing potatoes, you have to understand that potatoes is the base of our products. I mean, we do French fries. We don't do other crops or other vegetables. And so we are definitely linked and depending actually of agriculture and on the farmer relations. So for us, working on agriculture and making sure that the soil is still healthy, it is about future-proofing our business. It is about our own health. So if we go to next slide, I will tell you a little bit more on how we are doing this practically. So we are investing on farms of the future. Those farms are like pilot farms. They are farms that we own directly. And those farms are really, let's say, the labs for testing, understanding, working with universities, but also with startups to understand what we can bring to the table that is new and can really bring some breakthrough towards sustainable agriculture. We will have by 2025 three big farms of the future. One in Canada, in New Brunswick, which is still the headquarters of the company, but also the native city of the family. One in China, and one in Europe, in the UK probably. And it is also very interesting to have farms of the future in different regions of the area of the world, because we know that climate change and the consequences are quite different from an area to another. So it was also very important for us to have this overview globally. Other slide. So if I zoom a little bit more into the Europe, how we work with farmers is very simple. Actually, we are working directly with farmers. So we have more than 1,500 growers partners. 900 are located in France and mainly in north of France region. And 80% of them are working with us for more than 10 years. We also have three generations of farmers already working with us. We are working with farmers thanks to a large team of agronomists and field agents. That means that we visit very frequently our farmers. We know them by name, and we know their farm. We know what are the other crop they have in their field, and we don't know just about the potato. We also, and it's very important for us, we contract more than 80% of our volumes to ensure some stability and security to our farmers. And we also have a specific program to help and support young farmers to get started. Next slide. So what about carbon sequestration and biodiversity? Actually, during the past decade, we worked as many companies on improving our practices. So we, of course, worked on on lowering our entrance, on crop rotation. Today we have 5-year crop rotation in the way we are working, and improving best practices. But we feel that in a way it is the time to go further. And we really believe that biodiversity and carbon sequestration is really needed. It's not the beautiful and nice and smart next thing. It is just a question of surviving and thriving and supporting our growers to keep on living from their work. So how to do it? I quite agree with my colleague from Nestle. It is challenging, and it is a learning process. And this is where, for us, joining coalitions, being very humble, and working with NGOs, working with other industries, and learning about how we can support our farmers with new practices and a better understanding also of the soil and its health is mandatory. So this is why we joined Earthworm pilot in North of France region. It makes a lot of sense for us because in North of France region we are more than 900 farmers working there, and so it is really important for us to participate in this pilot, and we expect to learn, of course, a lot. And we also globally join another platform, which is One Planet Business for Biodiversity, which was launched last September in New York at the UN General Assembly, and which also is trying to bring to bring a lot of multinationals to the table and try to make things happen and learn about regenerative agriculture. As we know, and it has been said just before, that it's not about looking at our own crop anymore. It's really about working at the farm level. So this is the main two big coalition we are involved in.
Thank you.
Next slide. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I think it's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for giving us, your learnings and what McCain is already doing. So our last speaker is Melchior de Muralt. He will speak about the role of finance to support this transition towards regenerative agriculture.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Let me to close the loop, give you the point of view of investors. Why soil regeneration is key for shareholders in the agri-food business. I'm a managing partner of the Puripictet Turetini, an asset management company based in Geneva and Zurich. PPT is managing over 4.5 billion Swiss francs in assets for private and institutional investors. And its fund offer is very much focused on sustainability, disruption, and energy transition. We are the co-founder of Blue Orchard Finance, a leading impact investment company specialized in microfinance and recently sold to Schroders. Our Cadmos family of fund, since 2006, engage actively with our portfolio listed companies on sustainability strategy and impact. We identified soils regeneration as an engagement theme and decided to team up with Earthworm Foundation in pushing these agenda during our company's engagement meetings. The fragility of the value chain of the agri-food industry, based on a dramatic impoverishment of the soils, is for us as investors a serious concern, as well as the negative role of agriculture on climate change and the commoditization of farmers, which was very well explained today by the speakers. Next slide. So as investors, we believe that the quality of the soils will very soon become a competitive advantage issue for the agri-food industry. A growing demand for healthy and organic food, combined with the exponential growth of the environmental, social, and governance asset management industry and the impact investing industry, combined with the emergence of the climate and biodiversity crisis, will move the capital market in trying to price the quality of the soil within the supply chain of agri-food listed companies. The companies which will first identify these issues and develop a clear and transparent strategy will gain a lot of momentum vis-à-vis the capital market players. Next slide. We are witnessing a growing pressure from investors on transparency. The asset management industry is currently witnessing a revolution in the ESG rating of listed companies toward impact, leading to a growing pressure from investors on transparency. A scoring of the quality of the soils and a measure of the carbon emission, or on the contrary, sequestration by the soil, will become a must in the sustainability and impact reporting of listed companies. So companies will have to disclose into their sustainability report their commitments and strategy on soil regeneration, their objectives and action, the indicator they will use, and the monitoring system they are putting in place. Eventually, they will have to report years on years on their achievement in a comparable way so that investors could really understand the strategy and the results. The companies which will be the first in communicating on that issue will clearly gain a competitive advantage. So we as an active owners, investors, are ready to help our portfolio companies in that direction and are very proud to follow Nestle in its pioneer move with Earthworm. The forward-looking approach of Nestle in that matter is clearly part of our long-term investment case. Next slide. That's my further one. So you have to understand as well that shareholder initiatives on soil regeneration management and governance are underway and will soon add pressure to companies. Big pension funds often are joining up for pooling their votes to push a initiative to the shareholders meeting on governance, on human rights, or other environmental issue. And that will be the next step of that kind of shareholder activism or stewardship. Next slide. So the role of public actors in financing the technical assistance will grow, and innovative and blended finance could speed up the process. We understand that companies, even the most pioneers like McCain or Nestle, will need additional support to achieve this revolution on time. We have no time left. The enormity of the task will require important alliances and partnership. By the way, the promotion of partnership is strongly encouraged by the SDG 17, and both public and private actors are striving to find innovative partnership for the goals. So we as positive activist investors are ready to help and provide our portfolio companies with relevant expertise. We are partnering with COIS, an investing firm, an impact investing firm specialized in innovative and blended financing mechanisms, and are ready to help our portfolio companies speeding up that type of initiative in a blended way. So next slide. So indeed, innovative and blended financing could be a tool to scale up that momentum. There are a few innovative financing mechanisms which could be considered: the social impact bond, pay on result system. Some of you might know, I could comment more on that, or the SINC, social impact incentive financing mechanism. So development agency paying for specific environmental or social impact result. The classical green bonds, the capital market love that kind of earmark bond. Could be a way. We could as well consider public concessional capital explicitly linked to regenerative practices and output to reduce interest rate from private capital and or act as first loss capital. Last slide. So in conclusion, let me say that impact investors and public financing are ready to speed up the change with innovative investment tools. So let's sit together and find out innovative way to help achieving this coming regenerative revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melchior. So we have now a bit less than 10 minutes for questions. So we did receive quite a bit on the Q&A tool. Quite a few have been answered. So I'm just going to raise a few to our panelists. Maybe starting with Pascal, there's a question here. Can you give an overview on the current trends regarding food diversification? Are farmers tend to plant less diversified food, less local food? If yes, why? What can we do to promote food diversification?
Okay, so I was just typing an answer, so it's easier like this. Thank you. Yes, you have two opposing trends. Farmers practicing concession agriculture and understand that they have to diversify their production. So you go from 3, 4 to 6, 8, 10, even 12 different crops, main crops in the rotation, which means you would come back after 12 years with the same crop. Moreover, they have intercrops, cover crops that they introduce so that the soil is never bare and is always covered. And also these cover crops are more and more diversified. You went from one species to now from 10 to 15 species you seed at the same time. And this is very sophisticated and it introduces a lot of improvement. Also now they associate crops and other plants, which means that for them, even more advanced lighthouse farmers, when you go into the field, you don't know if this is a main crop or if this is a cover crop. Everything is associated. And this is the most sophisticated development now. Many farmers are doing this, and that's very interesting. Now, if you work in a region where the industry has installed big manufacturers collecting very limited numbers of crops, then, of course, that's the opposite tendency. If you want to sell your product, you need to produce what it is treated in the region. So you need a diversified industry to be able to sell your diversified production. And this is in different aspects. What we see is that when farmers are going into this direction, much often they develop their own local industry because they don't find a solution there. So that shows how much the industry can help that, because that's only local initiatives, but you have to channelize this. Moreover, it's also a matter of equipment. For instance, you have different crops at the same time, which means when you harvest, you have different seeds you have to sort. And most of the common mills don't have anything to sort. They say, we take one only. So now you have to find a place elsewhere. These are very, very practical things that are contributing very strongly to either diversifying or going to monoculture or very simplified culture, which indeed, that was a question, yes, it impacts the soil. This is a major factor.
Okay, thanks a lot, Pascal. We'll just maybe run a bit over the time, maybe 5 minutes, 5 extra minutes to give more chances to our panelists to answer questions. So hopefully it's okay with everyone. We have a question here for Bastien, a general question. What do you think is the greatest obstacle to a transition towards regenerative agriculture?
The greatest obstacle, I think there are many great obstacles, but I really think that valuing soil health and being able to reward farmers for their efforts in many manners is key, because today all the risk is on the shoulders of the farmer. So many people advise and say, you should do this, you should do that. But the risk is immense. And if I put myself in the shoes of the farmer, maybe I've got my kids at university, I've got loans, I've got credits and all things like that. And today the system has sustained me. And so the need for change that I perceive as a farmer might not be as big as what the society perceives. And therefore, to lower that level of risk, there really needs to be everyone coming together and figure out, okay, how can we reward the farmer for not things that he should not be doing, but things that he should be doing. And I believe there are lots of value to be created through a better management of soil. And the idea for us is to make sure that all these forces, be they investors, brands, local water management agencies, everyone basically converge to support the farmer with knowledge, remuneration, technical support so that he can take that risk. He's kind of our hero, and we need him to overcome all these risks, and we need to come and support him in doing that. That's for me the biggest obstacle. And that translates into one very big obstacle is to get people to work together. And I think this is a major challenge. And I rejoice when I see McCain, Nestle side by side, discussing about how to work, and their investors saying, hey, how can I help? And for me, this is a positive sign.
Thank you, Bastien. We have a question there for Jan. Jan, what is the most important story to tell towards driving consumer awareness? What relevant marketing partners have you identified for doing so?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah. So let me try this. I'm not really a marketing person, but we do have a few examples of this where we're going beyond putting a logo on a pack and really telling stories through videos, through the new ways that we have to connect with consumers now with the digital world, connecting then to more information on some website, and maybe a step-by-step approach in educating consumers on issues, be it on the social issues and the upstream supply chains or the environmental ones. So yeah, more on the storytelling than on the unknown logo, which is in the middle of many others, be it on nutrition, environment, social, etc. So we still have that lever for some of our products. But now if we want to mainstream on some non-premium brands, I would say, and again, that's only my point of view, but we need a larger scale of storytelling with different fronts, not just very specific ones on pack. And we have examples of this with some of our cereals brands, where similar to Living Soils program, we have storytelling around how we work with farmers in France on wheat supplies, on agroecological practices, for instance. And some other brands in other countries have examples of these that I'm not aware of every single one. It's quite a large panel of brands we have.
Thank you, Jan. So last two questions, quickly, unfortunately, we don't have that much time. First for Karima, it looks simple, but maybe not that simple. What is the farm of the future? How does the farm of the future looks like?
Oh, so the farm of the future, actually, you have to imagine a big field. It is really working like a regular farm. That means that we will not grow only potatoes, otherwise it will not be very realistic. So it will be really a farm with a lot of different crops, but it will also be a demonstrative farm. That means that we will invite a lot of universities. We will also host some research and scientists willing to try things. We also include all the data and technology and sensors trials. So it is really a play field for new technologies, a lab, a place to learn. We are really willing to include universities with us, but also a place where farmers can come and see by their own the results we achieved with such or another one of practices. So I hope it is answering the question. And once the one in Europe is open, we of course will be very delighted to organize open visits, and we will put that on internet to be able to welcome who is curious about the subject.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, we'll end on this note about the future farm. Just before this, so there's more questions. So our panelists will answer them as much as they can after this. As you can see on the screen. So yeah, to continue to ask this question in this way, we want to thank you for being part of this webinar. We hope you learned a lot. There's been a poll as well, so you've probably seen that on your screen. If you want to answer to that poll, it's up to you. And a big thank you to our panelists. It was a great discussion, very rich on quite a complex matter. And you can see on the screen, you can get in touch with us on info@earthworm.org or subscribe to the newsletter. Again, big thank you to all, and see you for our next webinar.